Good afternoon. This is Legal Correspondence, where you will learn how to correspond with others professionally within the legal profession. There are basically two purposes to legal correspondence. The first is to inform or to advise the recipient of something. The second is to request something, for example, a document. To inform, basically, an example would be you write to the client to inform the client of an upcoming meeting at the law firm. Another reason might be to inform the client that the law firm is accepting his or her case. Now, to request a document, for example, you'd be writing to a hospital or a doctor requesting the patient's medical records. Now, that can be tricky because HIPAA rules come into play with that. So you'd want to also include an authorization by the client to obtain his or her medical records. But that would be an example of requesting a document. Another reason might be to ask the client to provide his or her copies of medical records. Now, basically, the format and structure of the correspondence, many legal employers, such as law firms, have their own format or structure to the correspondence. And if so, the general rule is, while in Rome, you do as the Romans do. So many times the law firm will have its own template or macro, they used to be called macros, where you pull that up on the computer and you would be following their structure. So that's what I recommend you doing if they do have a macro or a template for you to follow on the computer. So in any case, the basic structure or format for legal correspondence is in the handout I provided to you at the first half of this class. And so now I'd like you to refer to page 5 of that handout, where you will see an example of a legal letter or correspondence to a law firm. So I'd like you to follow along with that. As you can see, the letterhead, which contains the law firm's name and address, is either in the top middle of the page, correspondence, or it's in the top right-hand corner. And that's called the letterhead of the firm. It depends on the law firm or legal employer, where the letterhead is exactly in the correspondence. Again, as I pointed out, when in Rome, you simply do as the Romans do. So you either ask, if you do not have a template or a macro to follow, what format the law firm or the legal employer would like you to follow, whether the letterhead is at the top middle of the page or at the top right. In many instances, the law firm or the legal employer also will have their letterhead already printed. So you just simply be providing the paragraph or the structure of the legal correspondence, and it would already have the letterhead on it. Now, the recipient's name and address is in the upper right-hand corner of the correspondence below the letterhead. So the letterhead appears, then the date. For example, if you're using a date such as November 5th, 2020, that would be there. Many times there is a regarding or subject line, so it would be RE : and whatever the subject is. Follow-up appointment with Attorney Perry Mason, or requesting a document. For example, it could be SUBJ : copies of your medical records. So generally, there is a subject or regarding line to inform the recipient what the correspondence is all about. Now, next, after that comes the greeting or salutation, such as Dear Mr. Jones or Dear Ms. Jones. Now, there has been a lot of debate in legal circles, certainly within the profession, as to what the correct salutation should be or greeting for a woman. In the past, it was perfectly acceptable to say, Dear Miss Jones. However, over time and with societal changes, the term Miss has been replaced with Ms. So you would want to say, Dear Ms. Jones, instead of Miss Jones. That's not to say that Dear Miss Jones is incorrect. It's simply a reflection of societal changes and with time as to why we are no longer using the term Miss and we use Ms. instead. Now, a lot of my students have asked, what if the recipient is a transgender individual? What correct greeting or salutation should you use in the correspondence? Now, that's a good question, and the answer is that you would provide or give the greeting that the recipient wants or asks for. So in other words, if you don't know, the good general rule is to ask the individual, what greeting would you prefer? And usually that's perfectly acceptable. And usually the recipient will say, well, I prefer to go by Mr., or Ms. Jones. And so that's what you would do. So, if you don't know, simply ask the individual what greeting they would prefer. And that simply avoids any misunderstanding or any risk, eliminates any risk of offending the recipient in any way. Now, after the greeting, you would break down the correspondence according to paragraphs. The worst thing that you could possibly do is to write an entire letter in one gigantic paragraph. And the reason why is because you have to put yourself in the shoes of the recipient. Would you like to receive a correspondence with one gigantic paragraph? Well, I venture to say the answer would be no. You would probably either not read the correspondence or skip over it. So in other words, the best rule is to break the correspondence down according to paragraph. Now, for example, you would want to break down the paragraphs according to the subject. And this would be a good example. So turning to your handout on page 5 with the sample, please look at the sample letter that I have enclosed in the packet. For example, it says, this quote, this letter is a reminder of your appointment with attorney Perry Mason on Monday, November 5th, 2020, in our office at 1 p.m. Our office is located at 101 Main Street, Suite 210 in Las Vegas. There is free parking in our lot adjacent to our offices. Now that would be one paragraph. Why is it one paragraph? Because it is basically informing the client of one particular subject. You're not mixing subjects or topics within that paragraph. You are simply reminding the client of their upcoming interview or meeting with Attorney Perry Mason, and the time, the date, the location, and where to park. And that's one subject, and that would be one paragraph. Now, the next paragraph might be, oh, please bring copies of all your medical records relating to your October 5th, 2020 car accident so that Mr. Mason can review them. They will help us with your case. That would be a new subject. Why is it a new subject? Because you are indicating that, or you were requesting the client to bring copies of his or her medical records to the meeting with Mr. Mason. The first paragraph simply is a reminder to the client of the date, time, and location and parking of the upcoming meeting. So that's how you would break down your paragraphs according to subject or topic. A new topic or a new subject would indicate a new paragraph. Now, conclude your correspondence with an ending such as sincerely, comma, or best regards, comma, yours truly, comma. Those are all examples of, endings. You can also say warm regards. That's also an example of an ending. There are many different types of endings. And again, you would want to ask your employer what kind of an ending is appropriate to the correspondence. So again, when you're in Rome, you do as the Romans do. Again, many times the legal employer will already have a template or a macro with all of that set forth. All you will have to do is simply write the paragraphs of the subjects that you want to go over with the recipient. And that's how you would structure your correspondence. Now, I've often been asked by students, how long or what is the appropriate length for legal correspondence? Well, that's a difficult question to answer because it really depends on the complexity of the issue or issues that you are writing about in the correspondence. Generally, the letter should be 1 or 2 pages for the same reasons that I went over earlier regarding paragraphs. If the letter is long, lengthy, more than 2 pages, the recipient often feels the urge to skip over the correspondence or not read it entirely. So, there are occasions where the letter is longer than 2 pages, and that entirely depends on the subject or the subjects within the correspondence. Sometimes they're complex, sometimes they're very, very simple, such as what we've gone over in our handout, that we are simply reminding the client of his or her meeting with Attorney Perry Mason, and also what to bring to the meeting. And so that would be a very example of a very straightforward, simple correspondence. Usually when the subject or subjects are complex regarding legal issues, the attorney will draft his or her own letter and send it out himself or herself. Many times the paralegal might cover issues that might be complex at the direction of his or her supervisor, or if it's a lawyer, under the tutelage of the attorney who is your boss. And that's basically, now one more thing I wanted to add about legal correspondence is that if you copy anyone on this correspondence, in other words, you're sending the letter to the recipient directly, but you are also sending copies of that correspondence to, let's say, for example, the judge in the case. You would put at the end of, sincerely, you would put your name, Paula Jones, paralegal for Attorney Perry Mason. And then below that, you would put the initials, CC, colon, the Honorable Lester Smith. Okay. And you would also include the names and titles of all the recipients, of all the people that you're sending copies to under CC. Now, what does CC stand for? It's from basically the old days when we didn't have printers, when basically we had a typewriter, and underneath the page there was a carbon, and then following that carbon page there was another page, usually of a different color, sometimes yellow, sometimes pink, that would show up as you type. So CC stands for carbon copy. Of course, we have no carbon copies anymore, but those initials CC have stayed with us through the years. Now, if you enclose a document or attach a document to the correspondence, you would also indicate that below. So example would be CC, colon, the Honorable Lester Smith, and then underneath that would be the word attachments or attachment, or it could be enclosure. Now, you can either spell out the word enclosure entirely, or in many, it's perfectly acceptable to use the term ENCL period, or enclosure. And that's basically the purposes of legal correspondence, the format and the structure of legal correspondence, the greeting or salutation, and the ending. Now, communication is extremely important. So in the legal profession, as I've indicated in past classes, both oral communication and written communication. And so you want to be as clear and concise, straightforward as possible in your correspondence. And if possible, after you have written that correspondence, ask a coworker or even your supervisor or boss to review that correspondence to make sure that you are being straightforward and concise as possible. Sometimes when we write a letter or correspondence, something will be clear to us because we are the authors of that correspondence. We are the writers. And sometimes it takes a second set of eyes to point out, well, the wording could be a little more straightforward here, or maybe your word choice could be better here, for example. So that's always some good advice. Another tool that I frequently use in my correspondence is that, if possible, I will compose the correspondence, and I will, before I send it out, print it out, and send it in the mail, okay, I will leave it set for a day or two, or maybe even if I can't do that, maybe a couple of hours, and go back and I would review the letter and say, well, maybe I could write this a little better, phrase it a little better that the recipient can understand. In the past, I have received form letters. For example, I received a form letter from an insurance company once. And that form letter was, well, let's just be kind about it, unintelligible. I I could not understand what uh, the insurance company wanted of me or was asking of me, if anything. So I had to call the insurance company and ask them what the purpose of the correspondence was and what it really meant to me, was intended, what the reason was that they wrote to me. That defeats the purpose of correspondence. If you have to make a phone call in order to clarify the correspondence, then you have not written a straightforward, simple correspondence that people can read and understand. And that is your goal. Your goal is not to generate phone calls to the law firm or to your employer about the correspondence. So keep that in mind as we move along in legal correspondence. And we will be, each of you will be assigned to write legal correspondence or a letter in this course. And that correspondence will be graded. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Have an awesome day. And if you have any questions or concerns related to this lecture or discussion about legal correspondence, please feel free to email me or text me or stop by my office at any time.